Hello, this is Module 16, the Missing Booster Club Funds case study. The summary for this case study was just about how there was a PTA parent that requested money from the PTA organization to try and fund her daughter's trip because she was an all-state cheerleader to put on to go to New York, and the trip was denied by the principal with valid reasons. So starting with category 1, my first slide, trying to move that so it's not covering anything. So this first slide is talking about what do I already know. So the parent volunteers are regulars at the sporting events and activities in this small town, George Washington Middle School. So there's only one administrator on the scene in this middle school. So with that, he relies heavily on parent volunteers for gate entrances, concession stands, things like that. He asks that the PTA organization and other parents that he can trust are in charge of the money, accepting money and counting money for those. Mrs. Bowman, like I said in that summary, works that gate fee entrance at a specific sporting event where the crowd, they expected a sellout, essentially. So Mr. Stevens, the building admin, he's the principal of that middle school, needed to be at the middle school the entire time during that event, so he couldn't really help with gate processing fees. Well, when Mrs. Bowman asked if her daughter, who was an all-state cheerleader, could participate in the parade for New York, which was an honor for her, her daughter, and the school district, her request was denied because he said that the money needs to benefit all students, not just one. So what we still need to know is, were there other parents that were working that gate that night? One of the things I left out, Mrs. Bowman was working the gate that night, and it just so happened that $50 was missing from the money bag or the register. And the principal, Mr. Stevens, talked to one of the parents that night and realized they did pay with a $50 bill, and that's the amount that was missing. And it just so happened that there were 10 tickets ripped that would have equaled that 50. So we need to know, were there other parents working along with Mrs. Bowman, who was the same parent that requested money for her daughter's trip and was denied? Was it maybe that she took it? Was it a miscount of something? I don't know. It makes us a little skeptical of her after just being denied and now money's missing. One of the things we also need to know is, what are the gate procedures for school events and activities? Is there a certain person that handles all of them? Do the parent volunteers work together? Is there one just sitting there at all times? And the last thing is, why were the ripped tickets not present in that money bag? So at the end of the night, when Mr. Stevens counted it with the security guard, those tickets number 78 through 88, were ripped, is what Mrs. Bowman said. So that's why those weren't used, but that would have equaled $50, which was missing. So why are those tickets not in that money bag if they were ruined? Why did they just toss them? So those are things we still need to find out. For category 2, the plan of action with this case study. First thing that needs to happen, if there were security cameras, which most schools have security cameras and a security system now, that security camera needs to be looked at. Every angle that shot on that gate entry fee. Did anyone, if there were 2 parent volunteers, did one get up and leave? Was one had their back turned to this situation? The second thing, they need to track down those missing tickets. If they were thrown away, they need to make sure who was working the gate after checking those cameras and confirm with them, were the tickets thrown away? What did you do with those, since they were not, you weren't able to use them? The third thing is, ask a PTA member who was working with Mrs. Bowman and if there were any large currency transactions. Like I stated before, Mr. Stevens ran into, I believe, Mr. Dumas, one of the parents who cashed a check earlier and had a 50. Well, he said that he had quite a few bills that he had to put away because he paid with a 50. So there should have been a $50 bill in that register at the end of the night, and there was not when Mr. Stevens counted it. So kind of conferring with other members that were volunteers that were working that night, were there any bills larger than 20s that were used? And if so, where are they? As for implementing the plan, Mr. Stevens and any other staff that works events, activities, games, needs to ensure that all gates have 2 volunteers, whether those are PTA members or whether he recruits someone else from the community to come work. He needs to have at least 2 people on hand to hold each one accountable. The second thing, no matter the event or the size of the event, I know only having one administrator can be insanely busy, but every hour or half hour, that admin needs to check in with the gate fee to the people to check on money. Are you good on change? Do you need anything else? If they have a large amount of money within their register or their box or bag, whatever they're using, that admin needs to be able to be escorted with the security guard to a locked room in the office where he can place that until the game is over so he can count. That means that there should not be over a certain amount in that drawer at all times. The third thing for implementation would be all tickets, regardless if they're ruined or if they're able to be used, need to be present in that bag and submitted with that nightly deposit for the admin to see. So when Mr. Steven goes to count that bag at the end of the night, if there were 10 tickets that were not able to use, they need to be in that bag. That's a protocol that needs to be established with each volunteer or parent member every time an activity or event is hosted. My third category is about the specifics more so with Mrs. Bowman. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm not covering anything. Mrs. Bowman requested money for her daughter's trip. I kind of went over this already. This would be an achievement for the daughter, the family, the school district, and even the state to have a representative from that school. Mr. Stevens denied that request because he said it needs to benefit more than just one person. It's hard to justify giving almost $1,000 to a parent, family, and daughter to go to this parade when $1,000 could be used to benefit the whole athletics program at this small school. So Mr. Stevens reasoned this by saying you wouldn't like it, it wouldn't be fair to give a track runner a free admission to a summer camp or a summer training, anything like that. It wouldn't be fair to do that just for one student. It needs to benefit all of the track members. So he justified that. He also said the families of students at the George Washington Middle School, with the growing population of the suburb nearby, this, I think it's town Warren, families are moving to that suburb. So they're leaving Warren to move to a bigger city town. That leaves the people that are left in Warren at a very low level on the SES area in that community. So considering that parents and students within that George Washington Middle School aren't, they are low on the socioeconomic totem pole. The last thing on this slide is the populations of families is decreasing because of that near suburb. They're losing families, they're losing students often because people are wanting to move to a larger city. Category 4 is about my own debriefing with valuing, thinking, what am I feeling after this whole case study. So with that, there we go, sorry. My reflection on this case study, there was a part of me that was very surprised, and then another part that in this day and age, nothing surprises me anymore. I thought the parents, Mrs. Bowman, is who it's leaning towards to be involved and have students that attended that school and then to potentially steal from that school. It seems like it's counterproductive. You're benefiting this school, you're providing all this extra time your students attend this school, and yet you're trying to take for your own daughter's benefit. And I understand, I can see her reasoning behind it, but I also completely see Mr. Stevens. So my own thinking was just kind of how thankful I am for my school and my PTO organization, because we have trusting parents, we trust one another. Thankfully, we haven't ever had a scenario like this where you had to point fingers or assume the worst in some people. Moving on to the next category, which was my own feelings after this case study. So it left me feeling extremely upset and almost, I wouldn't say afraid, but kind of anxious for imagining becoming an administrator or a principal at a school and having little to no help. You are the only administrator in that school other than the office staff that could assist with bookkeeping. But I just can't imagine how hard that job would be, knowing you have an event where your gymnasium is going to be packed with people and there's only one admin that can take care of that event that night. Yes, you can have other staff on hand, but when you're the only admin, if something happens for some reason like this where the money is gone, it falls back on you because there's only one of you. If you couldn't be doing, I mean, it makes you look bad to have this happen on your hands. And when there's more than just one admin present, this is not as likely to happen because someone could be overseeing the entry or concession stands, whatever it is. So taking on the responsibility of this would be extremely hard. So that's my own feeling. I feel terrible for Mr. Stevens and hope that if this were me one day, there would be more than just one admin on the scene. Continuing category 4, this is my own values. I truly, like I said, I truly value my PTA, PTO volunteers at my own school, the loyalty and the honesty that we have with them, where we can truly trust them with money, with our kids, with anything. Finding the strong-minded and ethical people nowadays is hard to come by. And even someone like Mrs. Bowman, who has been an active member of your PTO, she's had kids go through your school, you'd think that you could trust her. And something like this happens where now you're skeptical of her. The unresolved issues within this case study, again, where are the missing tickets? Where was that missing money? It's hard to point fingers because you do have this trust, but it's kind of with what had happened just recently with Mrs. Bowman, it kind of leaves you, well, she was working and the $50 is gone. So where was that? Did Mrs. Bowman, in fact, steal the money? It makes you wonder, like I said, with the past that has just happened with her asking and being denied. And then could this have happened in the past? Maybe a different parent or maybe Mrs. Bowman has done this before and gotten away with it, where now you kind of had an idea about it because of what she had asked before. Could this have happened where tickets were ruined supposedly before and you just overlooked it? So those are still some unresolved issues that we're kind of wondering about. Moving on to category 5, I'm going to be covering up my picture just a little bit. So this is promoting the effective practices. So Mr. Stevens if he would have established protocol, which he did with the security guard, but if he had this specific protocol at the end of the night, it should be effective, and he's practiced that before. He has a security guard stand by him as he counts the money and then escort him to the car, ride with him in the car, and make the night deposit at the bank, whatever bank the school's with. When he had the correct totals in the bag, he thought it was fine, and then he saw the note that numbers 78 through 88 of tickets were ruined. They were ripped and missing. They were not in the bag, and then that kind of made him wonder, ooh, I knew that Mr. Dumas paid with a 50, and that's not in the bag. So all of those things kind of snowballed together to make this assumption that Mrs. Bowman was the one at fault for this. For this next component, this is the well-being and learning for students. So Mr. Stevens, from the beginning, did not allow any PTA member or volunteer to use any kind of money. He told Mrs. Bowman that from the beginning. It needs to benefit the majority of students, not just one. He makes his presence known, excuse me, by having a strong bond with the parents and families of the students at George Washington Middle School. He's out and about. He has a positive rapport with these people. He shows his respect and loyalty. So with the respect, loyalty, and that building relationships within this community, the PTA members, parents, and volunteers have that same feeling reciprocated. The social and academic learning, by allowing the funding to benefit more than one student, he's looking out for the overall well-being of all students in attendance at George Washington Middle School. He has the trust and loyalty with the parents that most of them have a positive relationship with Mr. Stevens because he puts his trust, his faith in these parents to not let him down, to be an assistant to him when he does not have a backup admin. Not only did he provide Mrs. Bowman with a true and honest answer, I cannot do this, it does not benefit the well-being of all of my students, he also gives her a scenario where this just wouldn't be fair. So like I said earlier, if a track student wanted to go to a summer camp, the school would not fund the summer camp for one admission for the student. It would need to be the entire track team if that's what they were going to do. So that answer was a little bit more relatable for Mrs. Bowman. Overall, this whole case study really makes you wonder about your own school and how these things have happened before. Where has this happened? and I didn't know about it beforehand, where just because Mrs. Bowman asked, now I have my